I feel like I should give that line again. Right. So we wouldn't be here without them, and goodness knows they come with their own heavy, heavy baggage. So today I'm here in my costume for Halloween, which is, I'm here as a celebrator of the Dia de los Muertos, which we've discussed now a lot. I'm here as a person who reveres the dead, a person who looks to my ancestors for guidance, for wisdom, for courage. I'm here as a person who is deferential to my ancestors, someone who brings flowers to their graves, someone who piles flowers upon the altars of my grandparents, great-grandparents, and all who have gone before me. That is a part of my heritage. My grandmother is allegedly from Michoacan, but she was a tricky lady. And it's very hard to know if you can believe anything she ever said. I don't know. That is a part of my heritage. My grandmother crossed the Rio Grande. She met my grandfather, a man of mystery, and then she proceeded to have children, and those children are my forebears. I come wearing a costume that belongs to me, and I come wearing a costume of someone who is a fraud. This is your heritage too. The idea that we should revere our long dead ancestors. The idea that we should turn to our ancestors. This is a deep, ancient, tribal idea that exists in the DNA of human beings. In every indigenous culture, in every part of the world, throughout from continent to continent, a huge part of the consciousness of that people goes to remembering who is gone, remembering our own genes, remembering the originators of our own bodies. This is part of all of our genetic heritage, part of all of our idea heritage, part of our, it's in our bodies to do this. And yet, here we are today on Halloween, and the vast majority of us will not. Even though today I have held out marigolds and people have brought marigolds and I'm wearing flowers in my hair, as a general rule, it is not typical for Americans to remember our dead on this day, on Halloween, or even on All Saints Day. And it's so different to call someone a saint than to call someone a soul. But why do we do this? Even though it's part of our heritage, part of our internalized history over millennia of time, we have so lost our connection to those people. And I'm here today to say perhaps we could reach out to them again. All peoples have a heritage of love and reverence for our ancestors, because they brought us here today, to this moment. And if we pay attention to their struggles, if we pay attention to the time that they spent, to their difficulties, to their pain, to their suffering, if we can empathize with them for a moment, whether they were brought on slave ships or whether they came over on the Bering Strait and were here for thousands and thousands of years, whether we came on boats and colonized this beautiful land, however we came, if we can sit in their shoes or sit in their seats and and wear their shoes and empathize with them, I believe that we can really help heal ourselves and our communities and heal other people. What keeps us from remembering? I think about my grandparents every day, but I think about the effect that they had on my day-to-day life. I think about the grandmother that I knew, the grandmother who took me to church, where I would push on her pumpy little veins during the entire church service, the grandma who fed me gum and mints and candy, all during the church service to keep me quiet, the grandma who dressed me for church. I think about that grandma every day of my life because she taught me how to be. And I think about my Mexican grandmother, and I think about the very few times that I saw her and the very few pieces of the story that I know about her life, and I mourn for her. Sometimes we think about the people that we knew, but I would like to encourage you to spend some time sitting with your ancestors and asking them a question. Because words have separated us, I believe, from our history, and I believe words can bring us back. When I think about the things that have separated us from our ancestors, I think about the nature of words. We as a culture have valued words since we began. We do not know a world or a time or a space without the written word. We do not know a time when the history of our world was not being written, not only by the victors, but also by simply folks who were surviving and were completely creative. We don't remember a time when oral histories were passed on from person to person to person. And we don't remember that because the act of writing obliterates the ability of a human mind to memorize vast oral tracts. There was research done by neurobiologists long ago where they took an elderly man who was the oral tradition holder of his community, an indigenous person who had memorized every story, the creation stories, the origin of his people, the family history of every single clan in his community. And they taught him to read. And when they taught him to read, he began to forget. He began to forget these stories because the part of the brain that writes is the same part of the brain that tells stories. From a child to a child, from a mother to a child, from a grandmother to a child. Writing things alone changes the nature of our brains and how our brains work. I believe that if we can turn again to one another and ask each other these questions, we can begin to access our own minds in a different way. In our culture, not only did we switch our oral history to written history, but we also transitioned from a reverence to the people who had gone before us, who brought us here, to a reverence for saints and saintdom and people who are written down and declared to be official do-gooders. Somehow we replaced the souls that went before us with the sainthood of people that we do not know, that we cannot know, people who performed miracles that we will never see, people that we can only believe in as opposed to live in. I think this is compromising to our ability to live as people of faith, and it's compromising to our ability to live as people with integrity in our communities. Part of what we're struggling with day to day when we think about who we are in Morgantown or in any other part of this country is, where did we go? How do we get here? Who did we supplant? Who did we colonize? Who did we take over? We often are so disconnected from those stories, we can only judge the effect. We cannot learn from the process. If we can accept that we are all migrators, that we were all indigenous at one time to one place, and that what brought us here is a history of stress and joy and pain and trauma, wherever we came from to wherever we got. If we can empathize with these folks and really hear them and see them, not only do we know how to proceed, but we can also learn how to put one foot in front of the other to correct the mistakes that have been made. I don't believe that we can do that unless we understand how we got here. To some degree, as Deb mentioned, our idea ancestors are in the Bible. And I am so, so, so grateful to the extremely honest group of people who wrote this book, because they really, you hope, did not hold back. There's a lot of stuff in here. It mysteriously portrays and it masterfully portrays a God that can and has addressed every single soap opera worthy peccadillo and drama we can imagine. But these are not our ancestors. We can look to them as idea ancestors and see the beauty that they created, the suffering that they caused, the genocide they perpetrated, the salvation they brought to the world. But that does not tell us enough about our own bodies and our own genes and our own responses to stress and our own responses to trauma and our own responses to grief. The Bible can give us some answers, but it cannot give us every answer. I recently heard an interview with Oprah and Dr. Berry about a book that is called What Happened to You? And the idea of the book, which I have not read, is just captured in the question. What happened to you? Is a very different question than how are you? What are you doing? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And because the book has just been released and I haven't read it yet, I've just been mulling about that question. And as we approach All Saints Day and as we approach this day where I'm really thinking a lot about the people who went before me, I think it's a good question to ask. It's a good question to ask of ourselves, of course, of the people we meet that we disagree with, of the people that we have conflict with, of the people that we don't understand. But I would encourage you to ask this question of your ancestors. What happened to you? Because I think we can understand them so much better when we ask that question. Do we understand the shoes that they wore? Do we understand the food that they ate? Do we understand the diseases that haunted them, the miscarriages that caused them suffering, the losses of their parents and grandparents, the times they were in orphanages, the times they were separated from their families? Do we understand them? Do we understand what happened to them? It's a very different question to ask than, why the heck did you do what you do? Or do what you did? I've been grappling with this question for a while now because I did 23andMe. And in the process, my entire identity has had to shift. Because I once believed I was a Fetty. I once believed that I had a certain grandparent who originated in Mon County, who traveled west, who went a certain direction, who did certain things, who married my Mexican grandmother, gave birth to children he did not particularly want, and put them in orphanages. That is not what happened. What I found out was that my father did not know who his father was, and that he has 2 other siblings who were mistaken about the identity of their father. That I have this mysterious ancestor that I will never meet, I may never know, I will never have any idea who this person was. But the way this person acted, having 3 children with my grandmother while she was married to someone else, has profoundly affected every day of my life. This mysterious ancestor. And I can only hold my grandmother accountable because Mr. Mystery is not present. I can only ask my grandmother, who was a mystery to me her whole life. I can only ask her, why did you do this? Why did you go to your grave with these secrets? So many of these things would have been liberating or freeing to my father, who suffered so much from mental illness. And I will never have the answer to that question. But the answer to what happened to you, those are answers I can find. There are people who are still living who can tell me what happened to this mysterious, remarkable woman who gave birth to 7 children. And I think that those mysteries lie in your past too. When we think about asking our ancestors questions and trying to grapple with our ancestors' lives and the things that brought them here and made them do what they did, I'm hopeful that perhaps we can move to a place where we can think about them as human beings that we might know, that we might have mercy for, that we might create a pocket of grace for in our minds and memories, because I believe that that mercy and grace needs to exist for ourselves. When we are thinking about how we're going to go through our day, how we're going to proceed in the face of suffering or grief or sorrow or pain, the way our ancestors stepped into the world, carried on despite anxiety, longing, the physical and mental disruptions of the mind that we live with day to day, I believe that we can carve grace and mercy out of that understanding for ourselves. And that we could perhaps, if we plumb deep enough, find a bit of inspiration, find a bit of hope. Because whatever it was that your ancestors did that brought you here, they did not quit. They did not give up. They did not sink so deeply into despair that they let the world go on without you. We'd like to think that whether or not we believe we're here for a purpose, that our ancestors hoped and prayed and struggled and lived and died and migrated and moved and slaved and worked with the dream that you would be here, that you would be sitting in this pew where you can say what you need to say, talk to the people you want to talk to, have a light over your head, a roof over your head, so that you're not struggling to carry water. You're not struggling to gather wood every single day of your life so you don't freeze to death. You're living a life that is an unimaginable dream for the people who brought you here. And that is very, very hard to fathom. That little bit of perspective is so powerful in a time where we are struggling with the exact same kind of difficulties that our ancestors faced: pandemics, disease, isolation, loneliness, depression, anxiety, fear about the future, regret about the past. Our ancestors moved through those same waters. They brought you here today, whether you're on Zoom or whether you're here in person. Understanding them can help you understand your own lives, your own self, your own genes, and a certain amount of reverence for their struggle and their pain, even if you don't understand them, can, I think, give us a bit of reverence for ourselves, a bit of reverence for our bodies that are holy, that were brought across land and overseas, over harsh terrain, reverence for our effort, for our struggle, for a more just and more loving community day to day. And isn't that what they would have dreamed of? That when we got here, not only could we be grateful for the roof, for the floor, but grateful for their struggle and grateful for our big, big hearts that sit in these pews and that are out there in Zoom today. Isn't that their dream? I hope so. Now we're going to have a little bit of an opportunity for you to light a candle for someone that you remember, someone who brought you here, someone that you miss. And we'll get some matches and just come up as you feel led. And Anna, if you'd like to play the piano for a little bit, that would be lovely. Thank you.